Welcome to Tutoring with Gavin. This video provides some important context around William Shakespeare's Macbeth for the AQA, Edexcel and OCR exam board. But it may still be useful for those sitting the EduCast exam, even though it doesn't assess context in the Shakespeare question. The reason context is important is because one of the assessment objectives that the examiners use to grade you asks that you show understanding of the relationship between texts and the context in which they were written. The more we know about when, where, why, how and who created a story or poem, the more we can understand it. James was King of Scotland during Elizabeth's reign, and when she died he was made King of England and Scotland because Elizabeth had no children and James was a son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a cousin of Elizabeth. The lineage was therefore not as clear as they would have liked, and in the past this had led to civil war among families who believed they had the right to the throne. According to Chronicles of England, Scotland and Ireland by Raphael Holinshed in 1577, Duncan was not a good king, and his defeat by Macbeth in battle led to stability in Scotland for 17 years between 1040 and 1057.
High five!
James was descended from Duncan. Ironically, the real Macbeth was apparently a fair and just king, and even felt secure enough to go on a pilgrimage to Rome. Historically, Banquo was an ally of Macbeth, but because he was also related to James, Shakespeare may have decided to put him on the side of good in the play. Shakespeare's company, the Lord Chamberlain's men, came under royal patronage and were subsequently known as the King's Men. The king could close Shakespeare's company down or even have Shakespeare arrested if he didn't please him. So there would have been pressure to placate King James. The idea for the play may have even come from James. During Shakespeare's lifetime, society was controlled by the church and crown. Feudalism and the divine right of kings were part of the social order, and King James wanted the public to believe that if this order of things was disrupted, it would cause chaos. The play, therefore, could be seen as a piece of propaganda.
You are fake news.
Showing what happens to traitors who try to kill a king. In 1605, a year before the play was written, there was a foiled attempt to blow up James in the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament. Guy Fawkes and a group of Catholic conspirators almost wiped out the entire English establishment in an attempt to reinstate Catholicism as the state religion. Guy Fawkes and his group were captured, tortured and executed. Their heads placed on spikes on Traitors' Gate on London Bridge, as an example to others who might be thinking of trying to kill James. There is some speculation that Shakespeare's family had Catholic sympathies, which may be why all of his plays have some ambiguity when it comes to religion. In Macbeth, the porter's drunken rant in Act 2, Scene 3, repeats the word equivocator, which was used by the Jesuit priest Henry Garnet, hanged in May 1606 for his part in the Gunpowder Plot.
Here's an equivocator who committed treason enough for God's sake, yes, could not equivocate. For heaven!
Equivocator at that time became a term describing double talking in order to hide one's true beliefs. Shakespeare's double talk could have been a clever way to avoid accusations of having Catholic sentiments. The church played a major role in Shakespeare's world, persecuting those who did not believe in the teachings of the church. Some non-believers were burned alive. More than 80 were burned at the stake during Henry VIII's reign. Nearly 300 were burned alive in just 3 years by his daughter Queen Mary, or Bloody Mary as she was also known, and 6 were killed during Elizabeth's 45-year reign. Under James, Scotland and England saw 2,500 executions of so-called witches, which clearly influenced Shakespeare to include them in his Scottish story. But he does seem to create enough ambiguity about the role of witches to show that he was not completely convinced they were a threat. James believed that witches had been responsible for a storm that had almost sunk a ship on which he had been travelling to Denmark with his wife in 1589. This trip to Denmark triggered his obsession with witches. James later wrote a booklet called Demonology, in which he talked about witches extensively. He personally supervised the torture of many women suspected of witchcraft. An important line in the play is when Macbeth approaches the witches. They say,
By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes.
It is possible to see Macbeth as evil and the witches as simply mischievous, but many interpretations of the play have focused on the witches having supernatural powers. In Act 3, Scene 4, the ghost of Banquo is sometimes shown, but sometimes invisible, suggesting that he could simply be in the mind of Macbeth.
Which of you have done this?
What, my good lord?
Thou canst not say that I did it!
His Highness is not well.
Likewise, in Act 2, Scene 1, the floating dagger is only visible if a director wishes to suggest the presence of a supernatural. Otherwise, it again implies that Macbeth is hallucinating.
Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand. Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision sensible to feeling, as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind?
Another important piece of context is how Shakespeare uses the number 3 several times in the play, which is a very important number in the Bible. It signifies harmony and wholeness. The Holy Trinity, the 3 apostles, and 3 archangels are all sacred to Christians. So why are there 3 witches? Is this antithesis an attempt by Shakespeare to create ambiguity? The 3 witches address Macbeth by 3 titles in their first prediction.
Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis.
Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor.
All hail Macbeth that shall be king hereafter.
Then at the start of Act 4, Scene 1, the witches are gathered around the cauldron.
Thrice the brinded cass hath mewed. Thrice. And once the hedge pig whined.
Happy a cry.
'Tis time. 'Tis time.
The third time that the number 3 is used is when the witches are conjuring up 3 apparitions. Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. There are 3 murderers and 3 murder scenes of Duncan, Banquo and Macduff's family. And when the porter speaks to Macduff, he tells him, "Drink, sir, is a great provoker of 3 things." Then there is Macbeth's famous soliloquy in Act 5, Scene 5. After hearing of his wife's sudden death, he says,
Tomorrow. And tomorrow. And tomorrow.
which signifies the meaningless of every day to come hereafter. I hope this video has been useful in your revision. Please subscribe to this channel, follow me on Facebook and give the video a thumbs up.